Our new story begins with the protagonist initially thinking he could easily handle the job of adventurer, but it was not so simple and reincarnated in another world and received cheats. He realized how wrong he was. It was after that realization of how naive he was that he wished he could go back in time and punch himself in the face. At this point, after he was able to defeat the giant monster, he finally realized that he finally had to call it quits. All the action takes place in a magical city called Liquion. There, the young man is near some kind of bar and decides to go inside, where he talks about how the job of a high-ranking adventurer is too dangerous, so he's going to quit. The guy is answered by an elf who says he never thought his friend would be such a coward. This elf's name is Yael and his friend's name is Takumi. Turns out it's an elf girl doing something totally illegal. I was once at work when she was attacked by monsters, at which point the guy saved her. That's how they met, but Takumi was completely at odds with that statement and asked his elf friend if she wasn't the coolest lowly servant in the place. Hearing this, the elfess seemed to get upset and asked the guy to stop making up weird words, but suddenly the young man flinched and put his hands on the tables. So yeah, he literally started begging the elf to introduce him to the girl she recommended, because he worked hard. So he has no money problems, so they can go to a bar if she wants them to. Seeing this, the elfess was a bit surprised and even called the protagonist a pathetic human. Based on all that is happening, she could not even understand how So even managed to make his fortune. But the guy sharply rejects her words and emphasizes that he does not want to listen to lectures from the lowly sluchatnitsa. That strange word once again worked like triggers for the elfess. She immediately grabbed the stool she was sitting on and said that she was well over 40 and not the last person in the criminal world, and therefore calling the protagonist a jerk is trying to order him to stop calling her a jerk. But the young man does not give up and in response says that lowly is lowly. At the same time, he emphasizes that the pixie is in his debt, and only then she agrees to help him. At this point, the girl says that she will take the protagonist to that place as a VIP customer, and even emphasizes that it is the best place in town. After some amount of time, the main character and the elven woman head to this place. There are many beautiful girls in short skirts. At this point, the young man wonders why everyone is wearing the same clothes while his eyes lit up with love, at which point the elf woman informs him that here is the largest academy of magic. According to her, the place attracts young people from all over the world, and so it certainly makes her job easier. Then the young man interrupts the elf and emphasizes that he wants details, at which point the elf is upset because she realizes she could have expected this. Then, in order not to answer a huge number of questions, she says that soon the guy will see everything himself and therefore advises him not to be so impatient. According to her, already tonight the young man will have a special excursion waiting for him. After some time, they reach that place and then the pixie tells the guy that they have reached. At this point, Takumi says that this place looks like a very expensive place, but the girl only emphasizes that it really isn't cheap. After a while, they enter this building, and there they are greeted by a beautiful girl. She immediately recognized the elf who apparently frequents this place, but at this point, the girl with the registration says that she is always grateful to the elf for her help. While Loli herself talks about bringing her benefactor here today, at this time, the young man seems a little embarrassed, but suddenly he looks around the hall and is surprised to see how many beautiful girls are there. He thinks everything that's going on looks very promising for tonight, wasting no time. The girl who met them seated her guests at the table, then immediately said she'd bring the best girl right here. And in a moment, okay, a young, beautiful girl apologizing states that she was told to come to this exact spot. Take her away. The main character immediately blushed and looked very embarrassed, while the girl just emphasized that she came here to meet a special client. As I expected with the girl, was truly very beautiful, and immediately decided to say her name was Elena. It's like the main character fell in love with her the first time he saw her, and started noting in his head how cute this girl is. But Elena only said that she hoped that tonight these visitors would treat her favorably. After a short time, they all sat down at the table and began to drink a little bit at a time. At this point, the guy said that he already loved this establishment, while the beautiful girl was next to him. Then the young man learns that the girl earns her money on tips that guests leave in this institution. And then the young man decided to keep 1 gold coin. After that, Elena asked the protagonist what he does for a living, because she initially noticed that he has a very strong body. Then the protagonist said that now he does not do anything, but an elven woman intervenes in their conversation and informs them that actually this guy is a former adventurer of the highest rank, and he is so strong that he even single-handedly defeated a huge dragon. However, according to the elf, he also left his former place of work because he almost died. And at this point, the elf sees an opportunity to tease the guy by saying that apparently there is something cowardly about him. But these words seem to have an effect only on the boy. While Elena listened to all this with admiration, by her own admission, she also sometimes goes down into the dungeon, but she's not very good at it. At her words, she was even a little jealous of the main character who succeeded in this case. Hearing this made Takumi a little happy. He finally realized what is included in the services for 1 gold coin. At this point, we learn the strange monetary system of this place. It turns out one big gold coin is 5 regular gold coins, and one regular gold coin is about 10,000 yen. Also decides to ask this pretty girl why she goes to the dungeon, to which he heard a rather unusual answer. It turns out she goes there for practice because even the Faculty of Magical Pharmacology does it. At this point, the girl immediately apologized and said she probably shouldn't have said that. At the same time, the pixie gets up from the table and says that now they can definitely go home. According to him, they have just started having fun, and so he asked the pixie to stay a little longer and drink a little more. But then the pixie thinks, true, the guy didn't realize what she was talking about. At this point, she grabs the young man and, telling Helena that it seems they've had too much to drink, tries to distance themselves a bit. After they went into another room, such a one does not ask the question, "What was that?" But the elfess is very surprised to hear about it. She wonders if the young man still hasn't figured out where this is going. Then the guy scratched his head and said that he understood and emphasized that the elf probably meant that this place would close soon. But the girl called him a dear in response personally. She also emphasized that the guy should give Elena one big golden one, and then that babe would show him heaven and diamonds. Hearing this, he was very much surprised and finally realized what he was talking about. At that moment, a picture of this girl appeared in his mind, but suddenly Takumi asks if everything that happens here is legal. And this question surprised the elfess very much. When she heard that, she was in a bit of a stupor, while the others were just asking her to say something. But then the elf only emphasized that there was nothing to be afraid of here, and even informed the young man that there was a scoring bedroom on the 2nd floor, so he could have plenty of fun. Immediately after she gave him this information, the elfess decided to quickly get out of his sight. While left alone with his thoughts, Takumi couldn't believe what had just happened, but he didn't hesitate and walked back to his desk to apologize, Orlena saying that it seemed the elfess had urgent business to attend to. Right after that, he put one big gold coin on the table. And then the girl realized everything. She immediately said that everything. It looked like she had too much to drink. At this time, a smirk was on her face. She also told Takumi that the bedroom was 1 floor above and wondered if he could take her there. Of course, the guy did not refuse such an offer, and immediately headed together with the girl to the 2nd floor. After he opened the door to that room, he was really surprised because in front of him was a really luxurious room. But then Elena said she was very concerned that the young man was only interested in the room, whereupon she knelt down and stuck out her tongue. At this point, the protagonist began to reflect on the fact that he hadn't even counted on something like this. After all, he met a beautiful girl, and she immediately started doing her job. At a certain point, the young man could no longer contain his impulses of emotion, and told the girl that he would soon explode, but she only smiled and stopped for a short time, and asked the young man to take his time. After that, they moved to the bedroom where cute Lena told the protagonist that he could do with her whatever he wanted. When he hears these words, he can't believe his ears and asks if it's true he can do anything. But then the girl only emphasizes that it's really true because he paid one big gold coin. Hearing this, he immediately went about his business and finally realized that this was a really awesome emotion. At the same time, he began to think about the value of everything that was going on, because in his opinion, one big gold coin was really worth spending. After a while, it was finally over and the main character looked really happy. At this point in time, even Elena emphasized that everything that was happening was truly amazing. Upon hearing this, the protagonist thanked her and stated that it was indeed true, and it was the best thing he had ever experienced in his life. Then he asked the girl if he could ask her one small question. Elena couldn't have expected that. But of course she agreed to do anything for her client, and then he asked her if she really worked here because of money problems. Hearing this question, the girl almost cried and said that it was really so. The School of Magic obliges to pay her too much money. Hearing these words, the main character was really surprised and decided to do a very interesting deed. At this point, he took out another large gold coin and thanked the girl for what happened today. Naturally, she was surprised and said she had already taken her tip, but Takumi, who didn't need money, said this coin would be his thanks. At that moment, the girl really blossomed and, hugging her virtuous man, thanked him for such an act. Well, immediately coming to the face of such closer stated that she would like to meet outside of this building and go on a date, for example. Naturally, the main character was very much surprised by such a statement from a girl, and even emphasized that in the places where he came from, when a man helps a girl with money, it would be called getting a daddy. Then he asked the girl if she wanted to have dinner with him or something, but in response, she only grinned. At this point, the protagonist realized what was going on, and only asked if he would stay here all night, to which he heard a positive answer. At this point, the guy was really happy, because not only did he meet Elena, but also agreed to continue this banquet. When morning came, the young man said goodbye to his beloved and went outside where the elf woman was already waiting for him. She looked at her friend and said that he looked like he had hit the jackpot, so she decided to ask him if he had enjoyed last night. The young man then said that this was indeed the case, and even informed his girlfriend that he had decided to go back to his old business. She seemed truly overjoyed at this news, for her friend was once again an adventurer of the highest rank. At this point, he took out a cigarette and even said that he had made up his mind and intended to become a daddy. This surprised his girlfriend very much. After a while, they went to the same bar where they were yesterday, and then Takumi thanked his girlfriend for this awesome place. But then he called her Loli again, and then the elf asked her to stop calling her that because it pissed her off a little bit. At this point, the main character said that Elena is truly a gorgeous girl, and happily informed his girlfriend that she even offered him a date outside of this establishment. Naturally, the elf was surprised at what she heard, and even asked if it was too early in her relationship with Elena, so she wondered how she had managed to pull it off. But at that moment, as if Mad Takumi said that he only added one more big gold, at that moment the elf even spilled her coffee in surprise because she realized that it was too much. But the protagonist was not going to stop, and asked his friend if she really knew many more places like this, and he said that he wanted her to show him all of them. At this point, the elf was a little scared and asked her friend to stay away from her. She called him an animal and still agreed to show him the rest of the places. According to her, such luxurious establishments are certainly good, but the protagonist should not forget about the support neighborhood. At this point, he again directly asked his friend if it was really all completely illegal. But instead of giving him a coherent answer, the elfess merely shook her head clearly. Yes, in understanding that it was of course illegal, and loudly stated that Loli was mired in the underworld, but the elf interrupted him and wondered if the guy wanted to hear the rest of what she had to say. According to some female students have serious problems due to lack of money for living expenses, and she emphasizes that she found out by accident. According to her, it is because of these problems that if you offer a girl a room to sleep in, she will most likely be fine with it. According to her, it is at this point that a man and a woman are left alone. But of course, nothing lewd is going on there. She looks at the guy and says it's just a rumor, and asks him if he knows what she's talking about, but Takumi, who understood, says it's too late to be cryptic. The young adventurer wondered if he would be in trouble with the law because of all this, but the elf said that nothing would happen if he didn't do anything wrong. At this point, realizing that Such is willing to do a lot for such attention, the elfess asks if he will help the girls who are in trouble by giving them a roof over their heads. According to her, it is a very grateful thing to do. She also asks him to comfort the cute little high school girl, and emphasizes that she can stay with him in the inn. Naturally, according to the elf, it is a great option. After that, the elf says that the guy can go on alone and he will agree on the price on the spot. After a while, Takumi finds herself on St. Abelard Street, which is also known as the Cheer neighborhood. There, he sees a huge number of girls walking down the street, and his eyes light up with happiness again. He pays attention to each of them and emphasizes that all of these girls are very cute. At that moment, his eyes seem to be scattered and he can't decide on his goal. And gradually looking at each of them, he thinks about which one of them to invite to the hotel. But he also stops to suggest that perhaps among them are those who came here quite by chance. Naturally, he is concerned about how he knows who he can get acquainted with and who he can't, because the elf did not tell him anything about it. At that moment, he is approached by some girl in a box skirt who catches his attention, and even who strikes up a conversation with him. She immediately told the protagonist that she had no place to sleep, and she would be glad if he would help her. At that moment, Takumi realized that the young beauty had approached him, and so he immediately told her that he would certainly help her. If such a thing happened, he would definitely stand up for her. Having said this, the young man realized that everything was much simpler than he could even think, and immediately asked directly how much the girl would like to earn. At this point, she seems a little lost, but when she comes to her senses, she says she'd like to earn 1 gold piece. Hearing this, Takumi blushed slightly and took out a gold coin, and said that it was the one that was his humble support. Then the girl thanked her newfound acquaintance and said that she would try to repay him for his kindness. Then they went to some very strange place that was more like an alley. Then the main character saw a lot of different couples there, and even said it was a funny place, but the girl informed him that it was a place where there were a number of cheap inns and you could rent a room for 1 copper coin. But suddenly they see a couple making interesting noises from a dark alley, and then the girl informs them that some people don't care about the room and just retreat into the openings between buildings. So the girl declares that if the uncle really wants it, he can do it right here, at which point she lifts her dress. Naturally, the main character was very happy to see what he saw, and immediately stretched his hands to the prey. While the girl only said that she had prepared for everything in advance, he said he thought it would be better to rent a separate room, especially since he didn't have any money problems. And when the girl heard that, she said it would be absolutely wonderful. She also says that, if we're being honest, doing something like this on the street is pretty risky. And then even the main character says it's really over the top. After a short search, they finally find a hotel that Tacoma likes. He realizes that it is a bit expensive but comfortable. After they went inside, it turned out that a room in this hotel cost 1 gold, and according to the girl, it was too expensive. She immediately turned around and asked the protagonist to go with her and look for another place, but since the protagonist is not financially challenged, he immediately took out a gold coin and paid for the room. Naturally, the girl was not said happy about it and immediately went to hug the main character. Turns out, according to Takumi, the cost of living is negligible compared to this point. When they finally reached their hotel room, the protagonist was again a little surprised at the room he had paid for. Unlike the girl who immediately ran to the bed and said that in that case they should get acquainted first, turns out her name is Lucia and she's a student in the alchemy department at the academy. Immediately afterward, the girl headed for the shower to stay prepared for everything. Naturally, she tried to do everything as quickly as possible, but even so, coming out of the bath, apologized to the protagonist for waiting. At this point, he couldn't take his eyes off her big plushes, and noticing this, the girl asked him how he liked her watermelons, but the protagonist was no longer able to answer anything, and only rejoiced at the fact that before him were such great gifts of nature. And so when he said he couldn't take it anymore, he immediately attacked this beautiful woman, but the girl immediately stopped the protagonist and said that they should do everything in order. According to her, she must first put the scabbard on his sword. Of course, the protagonist did not resist, and then the girl informed him that only the largest size was suitable for his ball, and that was a stretch. It was truly amazing to her. Then shook her body, and looking tenderly at her daddy, she said they could finally start. Turns out Takome met the elf girl when she was attacked by monsters, at which point the girl thought the goblins would do terrible things to her, but the guy saved her. I didn't immediately find common ground. At that point in time, they were only chatting about how beautiful women's bodies are after all. Then she set him up with 2 young hotties who were willing to do anything for money. At this moment, they were again in that very bar, and the elf woman asked the guy what he was planning to do, because he used to be an adventurer of the highest rank. She wondered if he was really going to change women like gloves for the rest of his life. At this point, Takumi gave it some thought and stated that he was going to do exactly that, which pissed the elfess off a bit. Turns out she wonders what's wrong with the guy, and even asked does he really have no pride at all. Then he replied that of course he didn't have it, because he couldn't take his money or his pride with him to the grave. At this point, his dog and thinks their whole conversation is a waste of time. She thinks this kind of behavior would be normal if the guy was a normal adventurer, but he has the highest class of all. Then the elf says that the guild has a very pretty secretary on top of everything else. And upon hearing this, Takumi immediately got up from his desk. He said they should rather head to the Adventurers Guild, while the elf who watches him realizes how much she sometimes wants to punch him. After a while, they were already in the guild where the secretary asked to pass the next one. Of course, first of all, she was immediately introduced to the characters. While Takoma couldn't take his eyes off her and watched with open mouth how beautiful the girl was, he immediately picked up on her beautiful form and how pretty and well-groomed a girl she was. Turns out the receptionist is Melissa, and she is the front desk clerk. But suddenly she recognizes the elf and is very happy to see her in this place. Naturally, her friends also know this secretary and say they haven't seen each other in a long time. That's when the pixie says that she's brought a guy here and he wants to register as an adventurer, at which point she introduces her to the main character. But he doesn't think at all about registering or thinking about what is rumored to have formed. And the girls are especially good, but anyway, even if she isn't, her form is very good. At this point, seeing the protagonist's face, Melissa interrupts his thoughts and asks what's going on, suspecting there might be something wrong. But the protagonist emphasizes that all is well, and again left with his thoughts, realizing that if they had such a secretary, he would not have left the adventurers. But suddenly, looking at the main character, the girl said that maybe he should not be adventurous. Naturally, these words surprised him. In her opinion, maybe it's a little late for the main character to be doing this, and then Takumi felt like some kind of old man and loser. Naturally, these words immediately knocked him out of his Sikalia, and he quickly headed towards the guild's exit. But the elf knew what was going on, so she grabbed the guy and tried to stop him, even though he didn't realize what it was for at first. After all, according to him, he still has no place in this celebration of life because he is a pathetic, disenfranchised old man. But the elf didn't understand what he was saying, and so she immediately asked the guy to give her the adventurer's card. At first, he didn't understand why. But then the elfess approached the front desk again with that card and asked her longtime friend if she was sure of what she was saying. The elfess also emphasized to Melissa to look at his record first. Naturally, the girl was very much surprised to see that it was the card of an adventurer of the highest rank, and so she immediately grabbed the protagonist by his clothes and asked if she could register him right now, because she is even ready to take the initiative in her own hands, and he needs to wait for his consent. After a while of waiting and socializing between the girls, the protagonist began to feel superfluous here. Turns out Melissa still isn't sure the main character should be sent on such a dangerous mission. Unlike the elf who emphasized that the most powerful creature is now in the lower level, and that creature is the Phantom Hydra, So she suggests that her friend slay this monster. Of course, I'm so happy about it, because no one even asked him about it. And that's why he decides to intervene in their conversation by asking the girls to stop for a bit. He thinks it's too much, but the pixie immediately answers him that it's just a little catfish. Of course, the guy doesn't know what he's talking about. But then the elf whispered in her friend's ear that by getting the fangs of the Hydra, he and his status and his fangs would increase many times over. Plus, from her secret information, she'd heard that strong adventurers get special treatment. Naturally, hearing this, the main character immediately lost his head and began to invent a detailed picture in his head of that very special service from Melissa. At this point, Melissa grabs the protagonist's hands and says that, of course, she realizes that it's dangerous to challenge such a powerful monster, but she would also like to ask him to do it. Melissa literally begs Takumi to do this for her and asks if he could take on this dangerous case. According to her, the reward for destroying the Hydra will not be long in coming, and she asks such and believe that she will try to repay him in full. Hearing about the reward and thinking that this reward would be the girl herself, the guy decided to make the next move. He immediately pulled himself together and declared that of course he would take care of everything on his own. After a while, the protagonist reaches some building that looks more like a bunker. It turns out there are quite a lot of such buildings in the magical city, and this is one of them. And this building is an underground labyrinth of sins. Turns out Takumi didn't know that there were many such buildings, and so he looked very tired. He immediately asked his elf friend about it, and she just said that he probably knew that this city had a rich history, and that she had heard that there had been a catastrophe, but she thought it was a perfect place for learning and trading. Tired of listening with her friend, they started to descend into the dungeon. At this moment in the distance, the young man saw a girl and immediately noticed her beautiful physical shape, naturally immediately beginning to figure out what she looked like. After a while, the adventurer was met by goblins who were not averse to enjoying the elfess. But Takumi, instead of destroying all the goblins at once, started to scoff a bit and said that they were a minority, naturally realizing that his friend had a painful experience with goblins. He began to mock and said that goblins are creatures that attack adventurers and do all sorts of obscene things to them. Naturally, this conversation pissed off his companion, but then the guy finally calmed down and said the goblins should be wiped off the face of the earth. At this time, the pixie watched her friend prepare for battle. She decided not to forget that Takumi is a border adventurer of the highest rank, and also remembered that there are rumors that he single-handedly defeated a huge dragon. At this point, the protagonist pulls out a huge club and finally attacks his opponents. At this point, very annoyed, but the protagonist decides to get the job done, and after only a few moments, he shattered the entire goblin squad that came out to meet him. At that moment, the elf realizes that her friend has really great strength, but she immediately pounces on him with words that she almost died of shame. She immediately asks what's wrong with Takumi. He looks more like a freak than an adventurer of the highest rank, but then the young man said that the dragon's scales could not be penetrated even with mithril, and therefore he had to use blunt blows. Then the girl objected and said that the shape of his club was very similar to one part of the body, but suddenly they stopped fighting. I noticed that not too far away from them, the floor has started to glow. It turns out that this happened because the monsters that were defeated disappeared, and instead of them, only magical stones remained. At this point, the main character grabbed these rocks and said it looked really funny, while his girlfriend already seemed tired of the guy being so stupid, so she wonders if this is the first time he's been in a dungeon. But she had no idea it was real, and the guy had never been here before. It turns out that by this guy's own admission, he immediately began with hunting giants and large monsters because the events were happening too fast. At this point, the elf realized that Takumi in this world immediately turned on hardcore mode and began the final bosses. Realizing this, the girl informed her friend that the dungeon absorbs dead monsters, leaving only magical stones in their place. Naturally, the guy was surprised by this, but immediately they changed their mood. And then the guy emphasizes that with this club, victory will be easy. And so he wants the Hydra to come out immediately. It is at this point that we learn that the elves in the guy likes the fact that he is very straightforward, and after some time they finally reach the lowest level of this dungeon, the young people themselves realizing that they had gone very far. But they were still confused by the fact that no one was here. Naturally, they were both very upset, but only for different reasons. Takumi was sad that he couldn't defeat the Hydra and spend the night with Melissa, and the elf was disappointed that she wouldn't make any money from the Hydra, but suddenly they both calmed down and looking into each other's eyes made a mutual decision. This solution turned out to be to leave this dungeon. After all, they still couldn't find the Hydra here. At this point, the protagonist decides that he wants to smoke a little because of the grief he experienced, at which point the elf also asks for a cigarette, but The guy asks that it would be better if she introduced him to some girl, to which the elf says that this happened recently. The next day came the time when Utakumi was finally due to have his long-awaited date with his Helena. The guy was feeling excited and was only thinking about what he could do to get his reward, but his thoughts are interrupted by Elena, who comes up to him and apologizes for keeping him waiting. At the same time, the girl stated that she is very happy that this day she will be able to spend together with her daddy. At this point, the protagonist stated that the girl looked very beautiful as always. Naturally, after they said hello, Elena asked where the protagonist wants to go, but he just said that he can go anywhere if Elena wants him to. Hearing these words, the girl was very happy and said that she would love to go shopping with the main character. This moment pleased Takumi very much, and he decided that this was the moment to start their date outside of that establishment. But after a short time, his face didn't look so happy anymore because he had imagined it a little differently. Takumi thought they were going to pick out her purse or clothes, but they had come to a weapons and armor store and a magic equipment store as well. Elena, of course, immediately notices that her companion is a little upset and decided to ask him about it. Then the guy said that everything is fine, and he just noticed that now the girl is very much like an adventurer. But then Elena informs him that she is about to dive into a dungeon to fulfill an academy and magic assignment, and so she wonders if the protagonist could help her choose the right gear. Hearing this, he finally sees his window of opportunity. Takumi was very much amused by the fact that he could collect equipment for a young girl. In his opinion, that is what is the privilege of a daddy in this world. That's why he said that if it was true, he was willing to buy whatever his companion wanted. After that moment, he immediately asked what the girl's specialization was, and after hearing that she was a mage, he began to give her sound advice on the selection of ammunition. After a while, they found themselves in an underground labyrinth of sins at the very top levels. At this moment, the girl was already fully equipped. It turns out her gear was all the best that was in that shop. She was very surprised and pleased that the main character even agreed to accompany her. At this point, the main characters only said that no monster would come near Elena, focusing his special attention on the goblins that he does not like. But unexpectedly, it is the goblins who appear first on their path. At that moment, the girl realizes that she finally had a good opportunity to try out all the gear she got today, but naturally she has no time to do anything, because the protagonist first rushed into battle against these goblins. At that moment, Elena watched him and caught herself thinking that she had no idea that this guy was so strong. Well, Takumi only shouted to the goblins that he wouldn't let them defile his dear Elena. But then, Lena realizes that this young man is not just strong. In her opinion, he is even too strong, because she had no time to do anything. After a while, they find themselves on the 4th level, and then the protagonist informs his beloved that it is much more dangerous here. Opening the door, the protagonist froze with his mouth open in surprise. Suddenly, he realized that this was the place Elena had been streaming to all this time. Naturally, the girl confirmed his hunch, and even confirmed that it was all mandrakes. By her own admission, they are needed to make magical potions, and she randomly found this place, and it fit perfectly. At this point, seeing that the girl can't pick the mandrake, the young man decides to help her. Naturally, his powers were times greater than Lena's as well, and so he was quickly able to gather everyone's andragores. Then the protagonist asks her if she really walks here alone, and wonders if it is too dangerous. Then the girl said that so far she has not had any problems. But there is a strange object here. According to her, this strange object is a dim magic circle. Upon hearing this, Takumi immediately asked her to stay away from it, but the girl didn't listen to him. And suddenly in the middle of this room appeared the very Hydra that the protagonist was looking for together with the elfess. Seeing the Hydra, the girl was very much frightened because she could not expect it. Immediately he noticed the girl and decided to attack her. At this moment, she concentrated and tried to use her equipment to at least secure herself from this terrifying monster. She even succeeded at first, and was able to contain the Hydra for a bit. At this point, the girl was happy about it because she realized that this was exactly the effect she had expected from the equipment that the main character had bought her. But quite unexpectedly, her strength was not enough to defeat the Hydra, so she decided to call on Takoma for help. The one naturally immediately intervened in this completely unequal conflict and stood in front of the girl, protecting her with his body. At this moment, he even used his strength to completely secure Kalena from that terrifying monster. The girl's eyes sparkled when she saw it, because she immediately noticed the reliable, strong hands and the sharp, noble look of her daddy. It turns out that earlier she did not think that this young man can be so nice because she is right now behind the back of a real man. Takam couldn't defeat the Hydra, but he was still excited because Elena would probably die in this dungeon. Naturally, for this reason, he immediately turned to the girl and asked if Liana was alright. She didn't even answer the question and immediately threw herself into her savior's arms. Turns out Sama Girl also assumed that she would most likely die from this monster's attack. At this point, the main character didn't understand what was wrong with the girl and why she was in such hysterics, but suddenly he began to realize that it was most likely the effect of the suspension bridge. At the same time, the girl reported that today she had learned a lot about him, so she asked him to do something unusual, whereupon she immediately stood against the wall and turned her back to him.